Okay, everyone, if we could please take our seats, we're going to get started here in about 1 minute. Ladies and gentlemen, can we please take our seats? We're getting ready to get started for the afternoon session. Apparently not. I'm going to start naming names. Okay. So, hi everybody, welcome back online and welcome back in the room. So before we start with the session that Peter and Kim will be leading, I want to make just a couple of short announcements here. The first of them is that after we have the committee breakouts this afternoon, there will be no more activities today for the full session. There will be only the chairs meeting at 4:15. So when you're done with your committee breakouts, which will begin at 2:30, you're free to go about your business this evening. I'd also like to ask anybody who thinks they might want to put a new item of business on tomorrow's agenda for the new business session to get in touch with Kay or to get in touch with me and let us know what it is that you'd like to discuss so that we can make sure we allocate you a little bit of time on the agenda to do that. So email to Kay or email to me and we will get you in the agenda for tomorrow for new business. So without further ado, we are now going to go into a plenary session entitled You Say Ecosystem, I Say Framework, What Are We Saying? And I will hand it over to our incoming chairs, Peter Brown and Kim Little. And by the way, the clicker apparently is live.
The clicker is live. Better not touch it then, huh? Do we want?
Not yet.
Not yet, not yet, not yet. No. We've got this perfectly orchestrated and totally under control. As several people have already hinted at, that being an Englishman, I should be starting off with a song, you say potato, I say potato. Let's call the whole thing off. Hopefully we don't get to that last line. But we decided to be a little provocative in the title. That's probably why we got some good turnout. I suppose a spoiler is, I don't know the answer. And the longer answer is, I'm guessing nobody here does either. But the serious point is that in the role of the Management Council is the body which is supposed to be trying to act as the sort of signal box of ensuring all the work is coordinating together between the committees, and that what's coming out of the committees and into the plenary represents what we as an organisation are aiming for. And one of the concerns, I wouldn't say worries, that's probably putting it too harshly, but one of the concerns that's been raised again and again over the last year, but certainly as the work starts ramping up in the various committees, is, are we sure we're talking about the same thing? When you say ecosystem, are we building something new from scratch? And if so, what's wrong with the existing ecosystem or ecosystems? Framework, what do you mean? We've got trust frameworks, we've got all sorts of policy frameworks, got so many frameworks, because we love them so much, we have lots of them. What exactly are you bringing to the table? What is it that we're trying to build when we talk about an identity ecosystem framework? So we thought this would be a good opportunity on one side to touch on and hopefully avoid a spiral down into details of trying to define exactly the term ecosystem or identity ecosystem framework, but at least to get to that point of saying, I can't define it, but I know one when I see it. And I think that's a bit part of the objective today, is to say, yeah, that's more or less where we're going. I wouldn't maybe call it that, I would call it this, but we seem to be on the same page in terms of what we're trying to develop. So that's one of the objectives. And the second one is to take a sort of snapshot of where we are in respect to the overarching mission of the organization in delivering against the 4 key goals that are laid out in the national strategy, and saying, well, how far along are we getting on those? Who's doing what? Is everything sort of synchronizing up nicely, or are we all over the map or not even on the right map? So the idea for this session is to sort of say, okay, our starting point is this, and here we go in terms of getting a sense of where we are. So I think the first thing to say, before I hand over to Kim, who will take us through the more detailed stuff of the work that's being done and how it fits in, is to give, and it's my view, no pride of authorship on it, and I do want to get a sort of reality check from people to see that we're on the right page there, is my view and understanding about where we are in terms of what we're trying to do. So when there's talk about multiple ecosystems, multiple frameworks, my response is, yeah, okay, that's not a problem. If that's the way you want to talk about the work you're doing, that's fine. Trying to define an ecosystem, and believe me, in the world of biology, there is no single definition of what an ecosystem is. And that's where it comes from, the concept of the whole Earth. Well, no, the whole of the Earth is an ecosystem. Well, some say, no, that's not an ecosystem, it's a biome. And within a biome, you have ecosystems. And within ecosystems, you have other subsystems, some of which are sometimes also called ecosystems. So trying to look for a clean definition from the original subject matter experts around what the word means doesn't help us, because they themselves don't have a consensus. But what we're talking about is there is an identity ecosystem, whether we like it or not. It's the one everybody is participating in one way or another from the moment you transact in any form online, where you are providing some form of identifier or identity about who you are or what you're doing online. You're part of an ecosystem. It may be not the ecosystem you like. It's maybe not an ecosystem you want to take part in, but we're all part of it. So when I think about our mission in terms of an identity ecosystem steering group, I try and keep that in the back of our mind. There is no ideal, it's just what is there. Our objective as a steering group, and this is my take, is to steer the expectations, the performance, the benefits, and everything else of that ecosystem, or rather our participation as humans in that ecosystem, in a direction which is healthier, which is more trustworthy, which is cheaper, where there's greater privacy, and all the other principles that we talk about as being key to what InStick is all about. So I don't think our job is to build something new from scratch. We're not building an ecosystem. We are trying to build X, and I'll come to that, which helps make the existing ecosystem, in its broadest sense, a safer and better place to be. Now, within that, get it, that some people say, no, Google is an ecosystem, Facebook's an ecosystem, Microsoft's an ecosystem, Yahoo's an ecosystem. And I would say, yeah, but that ecosystem's not the one I'm talking about. And this is where we get into the problem of terminology and defining exactly what we mean. I think all those are valid, and we don't have to, in my opinion, go into a process of saying, no, if we're using the same word for two different things, we're going to get lost, so we've got to absolutely nail down a clean definition of each. We could do that. If you want to do that, I'll take my management council hat off and put my standards development expert hat on and say there's a process for that and there's standards to help you do that, if that's really where you want to go. What I prefer to think of is saying, okay, we understand there's ambiguity in the terms, but we know it when we see it. We know what we're talking about. And I think if there's a broad consensus that we are developing a set of some things, the X that I'll come to, that is helping improve the reality of this identity ecosystem, of all our experiences online, then that is the core of the mission of IDESG. Now, what is this X? Well, in our rules of association and in the national strategy document, they talk about building a framework of policies, processes, standards, best practices, and technologies that together help build this future ecosystem. Now, in that sense, for me, framework means that. It's the overarching set of the deliverables that this organization's scoped to develop and put out the door, that together provide a framework in which anybody in their online transactions is able to work and function in alignment with those core guiding principles of INSTIC. So when we're talking about framework in that context, we mean framework in that broadest sense of that to be defined bag of policies, standards, processes, and so on, which is distinct from existing trust frameworks, policy frameworks, or other types of frameworks which we know, love, loathe, detest, and that form part of the various individual ecosystems that are currently out there. I don't think there's any magic in what I've said. I think it's just a question of laying out some ideas so that when we talk about development of an ecosystem framework, we think of it in that sense, the improving the overall experience of the existing ecosystem through a framework of policies, processes, standards, and technologies that align with those core INSTIC principles and goals. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Kim, who's going to take us through, well, what are those goals and what is the role of INSTIC in all of that?
Okay, so the older I get, the more I realize I'm a simple girl living in a very complicated world. Let's not even talk about names. But really, when we start talking about these things, I just like to put things in context. I like pictures. I like few words. We're going to be a great team.
I think too much. Yeah, I know.
No, I didn't say that. But really, I really do like making sure that we're all grounded. We're all on the same page and kind of headed in the same path. I was telling somebody that, they say that a leader without anyone following them is just going for a walk. And I don't like exercise, so I'm not doing that. So here are the 4 INSTIC goals. I hope you all can see them. I can see them kind of. So the very first goal up there is develop a comprehensive identity ecosystem framework. Build and implement the ecosystem is goal 2. Enhance confidence and willingness to participate in the identity ecosystem is goal 3. And the 4th goal is ensure the long-term success and sustainability of the identity ecosystem. So it sounds so nice and clean. And so I wanted to make sure that we all kind of just remembered that this is what the goals are at the high level for INSTIC. And as a result of that, within the creation of the IDESG, there were 9 main committees that were created. There have been a number of ad hoc committees, committees that only had a short period of time that was needed, and some subcommittees. So those are all not represented, but currently the active committees that have information on the dashboard, which is what we use to kind of measure our deliverables and stay on track, are the ones that are represented up here. Please do not be offended if you are on a committee that's not listed here. That's not the intent of the slide. And so, as I was talking to Peter, I was like, okay, I need to have a better understanding, and Bob has been really helpful in telling me we need to just stay in sync with each other as the transition happens. But this is my boiling down of the action dashboard. So the dashboard is a much larger spreadsheet that they keep track of all the different activities that the committees are doing, and committees get a chance to have dates and timelines, and they get to say whether it's completed. But there are about 30 different deliverables that appear on that dashboard, I think 28. And a large number of them have been completed. Many are in progress, and some of them have not yet started. So if you're on a committee and you don't feel like you're seeing a lot of progress, I just wanted to let you all know that there's a lot of work going on. And sometimes we don't see it because we're in the middle of it. But there is a lot of work and a lot of things have been completed. So, I mean, that's a really good thing. But how this relates to yet another set of components in a framework, I just wanted to keep tying all that stuff back. So we have, if we go back to the goals and just look at the top two, that are really around developing that framework and building and implementing it, there is a set of components that we have thought fit very well from a framework development standpoint. We've worked with the NPO and the Management Council to better understand what we think those components are. This may not be the final list of components, and we want to have your feedback on this, but a functional model has to be developed. We'll need to define guiding principle requirements. We'll define the initial risk models that exist for this. And then there needs to be a compliance and conformance program. And in the end, there'll be implementation tools. And so then who's going to do all this work? So this kind of shows who we think will be the lead committees in these activities. So for functional model, the security committee has been doing a lot of stuff. If you are sitting in that room, in this room yesterday, you heard a lot of the things that will be driven out by the security committee. And again, the same thing as that other slide. If your committee is not up here, please do not be offended. We'll put you up here. We need everybody to be a part of all of this. The plenary itself is going to be really critical in creating that functional model. The defined guiding principles and requirements, we figured that it's going to be security, user experience, privacy coordination, and standards coordination. They're going to have really critical roles in that. To define the initial risk models, security standards, I just didn't have enough room, but the standards coordination and the privacy coordination committees, both of those, and the plenary as a whole. The compliance and conformance program, the trust framework, trustmark group, the standards, plenary, and the board. And then lastly, the implementation tools is going to be heavily by the security committee. So that's what we thought were going to be like the lead committees that would be involved in this. And so what I thought would be helpful is that, as we keep talking about these, we also lay out who's going to be doing the work. So just at this phase, I'd like to see if anybody has any questions or comments. This is not intended to be a one-way conversation, but do you all understand what we're trying to at least get us started with as we look at the components of the framework? How do we do? And we have to do it. We have to use a mic. We have to use a mic.
People online.
Were those 5 that you identified mapped out to the dashboard? Would I be able to find those 5 on the dashboard today?
These 5 here?
Those are the same 5 as the last slide, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are.
No, because this is not dashboard activity. This is to get us past. If we're really, so the challenge is there's a lot of activities going on, but they don't all map back to these goals. These goals of getting the framework completed.
So at some point, I guess the question will become, how do we get the dashboard activity rodeo roped around and moved to those goals?
That's right. That's right. And what I think is going to also happen is after we've all agreed that these are the components that are needed, that some of the activities, and I hope the people who are online that are looking at these slides aren't getting dizzy as I move back and forth on them, I'm sorry, that are here, some of them may change, some will be added because they might realize that, okay, if my committee is responsible for this task, I got to add 5 more committees, 5 more objectives or deliverables to be able to keep going. So you're absolutely right. Bob?
So if you could move to the slide that has the activities mapped against the committees. Yeah, so here I think it's probably evident that there's a little bit of a workload management issue.
Yes.
So the security committee is probably looking nervous at this point, and to an extent the standards committee also. So I presume the management council will be taking up the question of load balancing?
Absolutely. But I heard in the meeting yesterday that there are like 20 people now in the security committee, so that's a really good number. But, you know, the great news is that we will have resources that can assist. So as the chairs of the different committees are really identifying all the things that are needed, we can also find out what types of additional support is needed. We can maybe let those in the plenary who maybe haven't been a part of that committee know that their particular skills are needed on the committee, because we don't have to always go outside this organization. There's a lot of people in this room with a lot of different skill sets. So we just need to know where we need to put ourselves sometimes. So, yes. Other comments, questions? Go ahead.
Jim Fenton. I sort of came up here to make a comment before I read the title of the slide that said lead committees. So now I'm going to make almost the opposite comment. That
Too many people are leading?
yeah, I mean, it seems like having 4 lead committees on one of these items is a lot.
Agree. So then what will happen, I think, is that that group of committees will figure out which ones make the most sense for them to be the actual lead and who will follow. We are a big group of very headstrong people. And my goal is not to piss off anybody right now. So I'm going to put us all up there, and then we'll all decide who's going to be the real lead, right? But these are the ones that are going to have a lot of work to do, and then we'll all figure out which one. Because you're right, there probably needs to be one lead committee so we all don't start tugging back and forth. But right now, just trying to keep us all happy.
My original comment was that functional model didn't have enough people participating, given all of the communication at the plenary, that we need more people looking at the functional model. I mean, if security and the plenary are kind of the only really active committees on that, then maybe we have the opposite problem there.
Right. No.
Yeah, just a complimentary comment to that, and that is a lot of the pieces of work inevitably are developed in the context of the expertise that people are bringing to the table. If you went to an online retailer and talked about developing a functional model, they'll probably give you a blank stare and say, what are you talking about? I had a similar experience with a retailer some months ago when I was talking about IDESG, and I said, we need more relying parties like you. And they say, what's a relying party? I've never heard that term before. It's a term of art. It's a term of art that we're familiar with. And I think one of the challenges in being a multi-stakeholder organization, and even there, we're multi-stakeholder in a way that many organizations who say they're multi-stakeholder organizations are not. Multi-stakeholder organizations are often different organizations from the same sort of industry or background. We cover everything from citizens advocacy groups right through to federal government, to the private sector, telcos and everybody. So coming to the table with saying we want to build a functional model inevitably brings certain skill sets to the table. And I think one of our responsibilities as a management council is also to step back a little bit and say, you know what, we're trying to build this thing, and if I put my sort of standards development expert hat on, there are different architectural viewpoints that you can bring to bear based on, whether this is a business view, is this a functional view, is this an an engineering view, is this an informational view, and all those views are valid and they're all complementary, and you're all pulling together to build the same thing, but you bring different skill sets and interests to the table. And I think when it comes to issues like functional model, although the driving force is clearly amongst a group of people who get what a functional model needs to be, our job as a management council is to ensure that, okay, is that model, is that component of this overall framework being looked at from the right number of perspectives that ensures that all of those sort of stakeholder interests and viewpoints are actually properly taken into account. And I think that's our challenge, and that's why on some of the things like guiding principles and requirements, you've got so many more committees involved because they're a sort of natural constituency and source for wanting to bring in requirements, where other areas may be a bit more specialized. And I think, and this goes back to Bob's point about the load balancing, it's not just an academic exercise from the point of view of the Management Council, it's to get a sense of, are we sure we're doing the right thing, that we're covering all of the bases in terms of following the guiding principles and representing stakeholder interests, and are we committing and making available the resources to make sure we do that? And if we're in a situation, as we will be in a few months, where we have our own resources as an organization, we want to be sure that we're putting the resources in those places that make that most complete picture of what we're trying to build. So it's a bit of a long answer to your very clear question, but I just wanted to add that as sort of backfill.
Other questions? Hey, Colin.
Colin Willis. Okay, as far as it goes, but there's a couple of things that I'm just not quite sure of. One is there's an implied order of priority in the way that maybe it's just the way that list is, that's blocked like that, and I'm not convinced that that's necessarily the order that you might tackle these things. The second thing is that even if you step back a little bit and you looked at that, if you put all those pieces together, is the end result a framework? There seems to be, there's a piece of magic that's sort of missing, and maybe it doesn't appear on this slide and this graph, but there is sort of something there that says I could do all that, and it's still not a framework.
So, and like I said before, these are the 5 components that we've identified. If anything is missing, I think that we'll realize that as we go along, or if someone already identifies that, that happens a lot as you're starting to think through it. You're like, we left out this entire component. There's a lot of work that the Trust Framework and Trustmark Committee has been working on as well, that we need to figure out how do we take that information and incorporate that in this. This is just one view so far of this, but I hope that it's at least going to help us, go down the path of those discussions. Instead, in terms of order, I couldn't figure out if I wanted to do circles or triangles, or I ended up doing some blocks. And I put them in a row, but that does not mean it has to be in any particular order, although there is order when we start talking about deliverable timelines, and Peter's going to go into those slides in a few minutes. So there is a bit of an order, because we did think that, you can't have your conformance program before you have your functional model, right? So, those types of things. But there are a few that we want to swap around, to your point. Anyone else?
Hi, Adam Madlin. This might be a little controversial, but I believe that there might be another component, and that is a block around the entire thing.
Okay.
To coordinate, at least from a directional and inter-operational and a collaborative perspective. There is resourcing needs around, as we said, but maybe there's also another component that overrides everything to make sure it all fits together, which will address a little bit, I think, what Colin was referring to. So just throw that out there.
Very fair point. Anybody else have any comments, questions? All right, let's keep moving. So I'm going to pass this back to Peter now.
Yeah, this is all. Go on. You said you were going to be controversial, Adam. Everyone's agreeing with everybody. Come on. I know it's just after lunch, but okay. So let's try and get a bit more controversial. So we've got a 2014 goal. If you remember back to the Atlanta plenary, we did a sort of overview of where we got with our 2013 goals. We'd set out at the beginning of 2013 with a set of 5 priority objectives that these are going to be our success matrix, our success metrics for the end of the year in terms of how far we've got along. And one of the 5 was complete a first interim identity ecosystem framework. Well, first of all, we said drop the word interim because it was starting to get a bit confusing. Because if you have an interim framework, you build it, and you perfect an interim framework, does that mean you're going to go through the whole process again when it comes to the real thing? And we sort of said, well, maybe that was a bit misleading. So we're not talking about interim framework now. We're talking about a first framework, and that it may not be complete. That's not the same as it just being interim. But we're laying down as a challenge collectively to complete version 1 of an identity ecosystem framework by the end of the year 2014. And that by doing so, this will allow a baseline for what we see as a sort of progressive series of types of attestation and conformance. As Kim said quite rightly, you can't develop a conformance and compliance set of metrics or deliverables until you've got some basic elements in place, and you probably can't build a sort of certification or conformance system until people have had a first opportunity to say, well, I think I conform, I think we're doing a good job, and I'm making a self-attestation that I conform with the overall framework. So we're saying that by establishing a first version of the IEF by the end of this year, this will at least provide the minimum baseline by which that first step of conformance in its weakest sense of self-attestation can actually occur. And by doing so, you're setting a stage for development of a more comprehensive compliance and conformance program by the end of the following year. So we see a certain progression there. In terms of what we think the development plan should look like as a program of work to take us to an identity ecosystem framework, there are a number of tasks that need to be undertaken, and as Kim said, many of the committees are already well advanced in getting some of this done. So identifying what are the key components, and I'd actually agree with Adam that one of the missing elements is the how do you actually govern and manage the overall framework? It's not going to be static. It's going to evolve over time. What process drives it forward? How do you introduce new bits of work? Who takes decisions on it? How does it move forward? But having identified what the key components are, at least in terms of building that version 1, what are the objectives for developing those components during the year? Establishing the targets for completing those components, and this is an element I think I introduced in my report yesterday, that one of the key aspects of resourcing that we're going to be looking at as a management council is how we provide for something similar to a project management or program management office that is going to be able to ensure a sort of synchronization or a facilitation of work across the various committees, and ensuring that they're able to march in step and to move things forward across the various activity threads in terms of developing a coherent project plan. And within that context of looking at the whole prioritization resourcing. And one of the plan, it says IEF development plan, this isn't some sort of mystical piece of work that we're hiding in the attic somewhere from everybody else. It's more of sort of conceptually a set of ideas that as a management council we're trying to discuss and socialize, and that we will fill in the blanks in detail over the coming months with committees, that this overall plan will serve as the guidance to committees and chairs in taking the work further forward. So with all that, we tried to look at, and we discussed a little bit, we can take the next slide, because we talked about timelines. Okay, so let's throw out there, let's see what sticks. Here are some ideas about what we think in the current state of play, the current state of advancement of work, and what we think is realistic in terms of available resources, some milestones for some of the core components that we've talked about, the 5 principal ones that Kim highlighted in her earlier slide. And we've tried to just put a provisional date against there to give people a sense of what progress we want to make on each one by which time. And so we're looking to suggest that the functional model, there's a lot of work done already, that could be one of the earlier ones in 2004, that's something we could have done and approved by plenary by the summer this year, that the whole issue of requirements, given the effort that's been going in there and the effort that's being ramped up now across a number of committees, could be on target for somewhere around the middle of the fall this year, and towards the end of the year to have a framework for risk assessment and also the outlines of compliance and conformance program by the end of the year. So, as I say, those are just putting them out there as initial ideas. I take Colin's point about, you know, the ordering, and there may be issues about how much, okay, you've got to do one before the other, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't start some work on something lower down in the stack before something else is finished. But there is clearly some progress and flow from things that will come earlier in the process and things that come later in the process. So that's our take. We had, we had quite an extensive and interesting discussion in Management Council yesterday morning, and the objective here was to share this broader with the plenary to see, you know, are we completely insane, or is this at least broadly in line with what people expect in terms of the overall work that needs to be done during the year.
So, given that this is a draft and the first exposure, and given that you're going to be discussing it again at the retreat, after people have had a chance to sort of take a look at this and reflect upon it, what's the way for them to provide their feedback to you?
Right. Hinted at that yesterday, but I think, yeah, to give a bit more flesh to that, as we mentioned, the Management Council, outgoing, incoming members, and thus also the entire board of the corporation will be meeting for 2 days in 3 weeks' time. And our objective is to flesh some of this out in more detail, partly from the point of view of fulfilling our own responsibility of saying, you know, we're going to be looking after the treasure chest in the future, and we've got to be sure that we're making the resources available where they're needed. In terms of how we do that, we also said very clearly, this is not something we're going to do in abstracto. We're going to do this closely with the committees. So I think there's 2 elements to that. One is, and I don't know how far we got in discussions of that, we sort of raised it, and certainly in some bilateral discussions yesterday with several committee chairs, the idea of having and carving out a good chunk of time, a sort of half-day meeting, whether it's at our next face-to-face or over a series of the regular committee calls or even Management Council calls, carving out some serious time where we look at this in detail and actually ensure we get the buy-in from all the committee chairs, that this is in line with their expectations and the work that they're pushing forward. But also, so that's in terms of fleshing out the overall plan, but secondly, as an ongoing basis, to have a much more sort of organic relationship between the coordination of the committee chairs and the Management Council in terms of ensuring that there is that proper feedback from committees into the Management Council of where work's going, and that we're moving that forward as well on a regular basis.
So I had in mind maybe something a little bit more immediate than that. So let me, I should stand up so that the camera can see me, right? Yeah. Hi, I'm Bob. To preface it a little bit, all of you sitting here in the audience should be paying closer attention to this than maybe anything else we're doing, right? Because the fundamental question that this is trying to answer is, what is the absolute minimum set of stuff that we have to do in 2014 to produce a deliverable that will meet our collective definition of a successful, version 1.0 of the framework. So if the things that are important to you as a constituent of the organization aren't in that minimum set, what that means is that the activity from your point of view will have failed at the end of the year. So it's very much in everybody's interest to pay attention to this and make sure that the right things are in and the right things are out. And what I'm wondering, Peter, is that going into the discussion at the Management Council in DC, what is the channel for people to provide input in that form? And I presume that rather than committees, since it's not a chairs meeting, it's a Management Council meeting, the right avenue is for people in their stakeholder groups to contact their Management Council member. And I'm just wondering, if you want to do that by email or set up a discussion forum, or how you're going to solicit input going into the meeting that's taking place in DC.
So I don't think that we have an answer for you right now, but we'll have that before this plenary ends in terms of the format that we want to have that feedback. Putting on the hat as your treasurer, what's important for me is that in part of the solicitation that we will be responding to, we actually have to have a plan of action in terms of how we're going to get that very first item that was one of our core purposes done. Trying to go back to it. So develop a comprehensive identity ecosystem framework. It's actually going to call out what are we going to do. And so I wanted to make sure that we have a chance to socialize this high-level concept with you. Hopefully you'll see that it's not locking us into one particular way. There's a lot of flexibility in here. And as we have more discussions, you'll have much more detail about each of these individual components as well, and you'll be able to help us influence how that really looks. So, but we'll make sure that we have a very clear channel to gather communication before the end of tomorrow.
Just before taking Jack as the next question, Jack and then Andrew, just a complimentary thing. As I don't want to underline it too much, but as a Management Council, we only looked at this yesterday morning as well. So this is our first take of the high-level view, and just literally before this session, we sat down and tried to say, how do we visualize this as a collective group? Yeah. So all ideas in terms of helping that process for us and for you are welcome. And I think Bob's suggestion of having, engaging the channel we have, which is through the stakeholder constituencies, because after all, 14 of the 17 elected members of the Management Council represent and reflect the stakeholder interest. So that seems like a natural avenue to have that sort of input. Something we can do to move that along. Yes, let's think about that and let's get something done on that. I don't have the magic bullet either, but I think it's a great idea, and certainly will help our work in 3 weeks' time if we've got the stakeholder delegates at the Management Council table already having feedback and input from their constituents. I think, yeah.
The one thing I just wanted to mention is that I think ecosystem is it's both an abstract word, but it's a good word, because what it highlights is a dynamic system that is going to evolve over time. And I think some of the challenges that we've had as a group is we have thought we are building and implementing something which sounds less dynamic and more static, that you can go put a bunch of people together in a room and they can go build something, and we've created the ecosystem. And I think that what we're starting to realize is the maturity of the organization is such that we're now realizing that some of the initial ideas were a little too simplistic. And that if we're going to have long-term success, there's more dynamic, they're going to be more bottom-up, they're going to end up having to have changes to the way we were thinking. And I would just challenge all of us that I think in the very short term, we have to have a better vision of exactly what we're going to be creating over time. Because as we've talked with many different groups, there often is a different understanding of exactly what we're building and implementing right now. And so I think coming out of the Management Council or the chairs, it would be really good to maybe have a full plenary kind of discussion that might come back with, this is what we believe we're building. Does anyone have concerns about that?
That's great.
Colin was next.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just an old
Second
guy,
bite
so I
at the
just
cherry.
went and sat down for a while. Look, I'm agreeing with most of what you guys are saying. I'm agreeing less with what's written, and I just want to pick away a little bit at the compliance and conformance. If you just flip forward the slides and you look at at where you've talked about compliance and conformance.
Next one.
Okay, just forward again. I'm just trying to get to. Okay, right. Stop there. Stop. Okay. So there you talk about a comprehensive compliance and conformance program. You actually said lightweight, I think was the word that you used. I can't remember, but it certainly wasn't comprehensive. It was exactly the opposite. Right. So I want to. So
Okay.
I'm not trying to point. I'm not trying to point out anything here, except that. I think lightweight's right, and I don't think comprehensive is. Just imagine if we were actually going to really do a comprehensive compliance and conformance program. By then, we would have hardly tested it. Mm-hmm. And basically, if we really had to try and deliver that, we could potentially fail the organisation because what if we got it wrong? You know, it actually has to start off as something very lightweight, because then you go on and talk about self attestation.
Right.
Absolutely fine.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of a kind of a inconsistency, and I don't even think that, you know, in my calls and my, you know, not complete attendance in TIFTM, I don't actually think it actually is reflecting what the TIFTM committee is actually thinking either. My first point.
I think so if I could just respond on that short, I think the keywords there are sets the stage, in the sense of you want to have in mind a long-term objective of what would be an ideal, if not end state, because what Jack said is right in terms of the dynamism of an ecosystem, but at least to say, in a really ideal world, this is where we would love to be. But that starts with that lightweight process, which may start with self-attestation and building up from that. Okay. It's more in that sense.
And then I just want to add as well. I was trying to use the pointer, and I was going to point at the monitor that only I can see. That doesn't work. But the baseline for self-attestation is for the end of the year, 2014, and the more comprehensive was for 2015 end of the year. So that also, and it does say set the stage though, but I mean, we're not trying to say that we have to have this stuff done by the end of this year. But yes, don't take the,
Yeah.
we can lose the word comprehensive if needed.
That's right.
Yes.
Those involved in that would know just how much work goes into that. And,
exactly.
So my other point is just as a small brief one, and that's that at no point up till this point have we heard about the pilots. Have we heard about so I guess we would have expected to have seen and the pilots are going to, you know, this next round are going to do this to support it. So
right.
I guess when these slides are run again, you know, there may be this notion of now really directing the pilots much more closely to test out some of those things to get us over the line.
I think on that there's two elements. There's the pilots, and there's another area which was highlighted yesterday, and the same question came up, why isn't it there, which was use cases. Why aren't the use cases there? And my view is the use cases and the pilots provide input and momentum and drivers to deliver these various components. And if you think of it that way, we're not managing the pilots. That's the Instig NPO's job. However, they do have an obligation to report to us on a 6-monthly basis. Why? Because it's the lessons learned from those pilots that feed in to the various elements of the components here. And that's how I would see it. Andrew.
Just wondering if you could speak a bit more about the risk assessment framework. It's not immediately clear to me what kinds of risks, what kinds of harms and impacts to who. Are we looking at risk to IDESG or the participants, or just speak a bit more about it so we get a better sense of what it's for?
Do you want to do that? No? Okay. Neither do I. I suppose the easy answer is I don't know yet, but it was more in the context of, as an organization, as a corporation that's going to be responsible for all this work, at the end of the day, the board of directors has a fiduciary responsibility to look at the risk to the organisation or what we're doing. I don't think it means that. I think it means risk in the sense of if we are looking, and we see that across all the committees, about types of transaction online, what are the combinations of things that need to happen that help reduce risk of, whether that's identity theft, compromise of security, levels of assurance, and all this other stuff. It's more in that sense. What are the elements of having risk being one of the issues that you want to reduce? How do you bring those in and quantify those in terms of the models that you build?
So one of the areas we'll have to discuss is how prescriptive will the organization be through these frameworks?
Yeah.
And if we're too prescriptive, will we just eliminate our scale possibilities?
Yep.
Right. So maybe it's an identification of potential risks rather than assessment of those risks, or something.
No, I get that. And again, I mean, I don't want to get too wrapped around the exact terms, but you're right. It's in that sense.
Yeah, again, this is a very open framework skeleton for us to work within. And I think we add as much meat as we need to have on the skeleton. Some of us like more meat than others. But I'm just saying. But but no, really, I mean, there are some areas we want to go to make sure that we can make sure that the framework is applicable to as many parties as possible. We, again, have a very, very complex task that we've all decided to be a part of. I mean, you all enter this identity space knowing that it's complex. But we can't make it too narrow and we can't make it too prescriptive, or it won't fit all the different stakeholder groups that we support and are a part of. So, agree.
Kim, could you go to your last slide, the process going forward? Yeah, that one, thanks. A comment, by the way, on the self-attestation limitation. I understand it, but I think the business model lies in the audited attestation. And so I think you want to have that as part of the conversation, even because, well, talking to the choir. Then, in terms of Colin's comment about directing the pilots, I'm wondering if he's talking about existing pilots that were standing right behind him, or directing the RFP for future pilots to address some of these issues. So, just a question. To this topic, I think the challenge here is to encourage experimentation and parallelism while we proceed on this. And I'll give you a specific example. I'm drafting an RFI for an accessibility mark. I'm just curious about what kind of response it might get. I hope somebody more important and official will issue it so we can get real live responses. In it, it's going to talk about prescriptive behaviors on different elements, different functional elements of the ecosystem. I can't wait for the model to write that part. So I think you want to send out a message to all of us worker bees to say this doesn't discourage that stuff. It wants to stay informed by that stuff. But, if the functional model anoints a different kind of set of players than what we put into the RFI, that's why it's an RFI.
Right. I think we have a comment online, first of all.
Yes. Hold on.
Are you punching through audio, or are you just reading a...
I'm just reading it.
Okay,
several folks would rather that we just went ahead and read it. This is a little bit of a lengthy one. This is from Kimberly, no last name. There is a huge planning risk regarding the small minimum target. The minimum backbone elements needs to focus first on the most high-risk, high-volume, multi-party system needs. We've learned the hard way with other IT-associated frameworks that they become very backward sticky, as human nature has ended up producing technology, interoperability, building solutions that are of low value to the public when really high-risk solution scenarios need to be most addressed, i.e. financial asset and privacy protection needs. Otherwise, the framework vision will again be drawn too narrowly and be only appropriate to low-risk needs with easy and simple technical use scenarios. So we have supported low identity risk scenarios, such as for anonymous public commentary, but we need to know how to support securing billion-dollar wires from hackers while keeping our dignity with privacy.
So I think that some of that comment also kind of went with what Andrew was saying about not making sure that we are too prescriptive one way or another. And that maybe will allow us to deal with the low risk and high risk scenarios. I think the other piece of it is use cases and those pilots. That the use cases and pilots, we have to have all the players at the table to be able to help us to be able to prioritize, because we can't do everything at once. And so if our use cases all end up being low-risk use cases, we're going to have problems. But the way that we figure that out is by having the right people in this room talking, having the reliant parties there, and the end users, and I don't know the right word, citizens and consumers, and all those individuals that are impacted also saying where they have their biggest pain point. Because we got to start somewhere. But just because we maybe only address, let's say, the high-risk scenarios, doesn't mean that we don't need to also address the low-risk ones as well. So it'll be an iterative process.
With the other ones?
There's one more. I don't know if you want to take the other. It's a different person. It's a very short one. This is from Martin Smith. Suggests that the need for interoperability imposes some limits on diverse approaches.
Fair comment.
Yep, we'll take that into consideration. In the room.
Hi. One of the things that jumps out at me just looking over this is I had a very interesting sidebar conversation earlier about business cases, and on the one hand, I think business cases are kind of underlying all of our conversations. On the other hand, I look at some of the slides and we're not necessarily calling it out, and it may be helpful if we focus a little bit more on the business cases and just looking at them across kind of all of the different areas, simply because the business case for low-value transactions versus the business case for high-value transactions, they're very different business cases. And the biggest thing is that if we can't make the business case for that relying party to use a federated credential of some type, and moreover, if we can't make the business case for that issuing party to allow their credential to be used by other relying parties, if we can't make the dollars work out for both of these parties, and we can do some pilots and some experiments, and it'll be really neat. But we're not going to see widespread adoption in the marketplace. So I'm wondering, can we maybe put, and I'm not sure how to kind of inject this into the conversation, but really try to help folks focus on the business cases, because also I like to look at it in terms of business case, risk, and liability. Because if you look at all three of those together, the risk and liability profile for one business case is not the same as the one for another business case. And it's not one size fits all. I would love it if we could get it right and make it one size fits all, but realistically the technology isn't going to yield that.
Right.
And so the question is can we inject some of that business case conversation into what we're trying to accomplish here?
Could you identify yourself? I'm sorry, the remote audience doesn't know who's speaking. If you could say
Hi, my name is Chris Williams. I'm with a company called Leidos, formerly SAIC.
So thank you for your comment. I think that because, again, we are a multi-stakeholder group that includes vendors and other businesses that actually want to ensure that there is the reality of an economic model that might exist within some of these things. We definitely think this way. But I really think that because we have such a diverse group, that when we talk about use cases, the use case should include a business case injected in there. So I think every step and every activity we do can have the business model, the business case included in those conversations. So when we talk about security, don't forget the business model and the business case. When we talk about privacy, don't forget that component of it. We can make things very complicated, and it's not something that is actually ever going to be able to scale or be affordable to a reliant party. So I think it's a component that gets woven throughout the whole process versus a standalone. Because I usually lead like the business model committee within whatever organization I'm in. But I think this is a great time to show how that business model flows throughout every one of the steps.
just add one other element to that. When we talk about developing a framework of plural processes, policies, standards, and so on, in my opinion at least, and in terms of the work we've seen so far, it is precisely to be a framework that enables different business models, different technologies, different risk assessments, different types of authentication, identification, whatever, to coexist. And what I think is implicit in a lot of what we're saying is when a bunch of actors come together within this who say they want to comply with this framework as good players in the ecosystem, we want to have some way to be able to measure, are they a green or a yellow in this area? Is it a red here, and therefore beware because they're not offering any liability here, so you do it at your own risk. And I think it's rather, and I think that maybe going to your point, is the objective is not to come up with a one-size-fits-all model. We recognize the complexity here is such that we've got to instead come up, and I don't want to use the word meta framework or meta model, we'd be too far out there, but we're talking about a framework which allows those different individual models, individual trust frameworks to operate in good faith and to identify exactly the points of interoperability and pain between existing or potential future trust frameworks so that these things can happen. But I think it's a question of shedding light and transparency on the different options out there and giving people an objective way of saying, well, if I go with these guys and I work with this is what I'm getting into, and I've got a clearer picture of what the implications are. And that's certainly my vision of how we should be taking it forward.
So I think we are actually out of time. Are we allowed to get one more? Can we get one more, Kay? She's giving me the neck cut thing.
Okay, I'll take it offline then.
Are you sure?
Well, no,
Go
I'll
ahead.
take it
Go
since
ahead.
I got this opportunity. My name's Russ Chung, and I'm a consultant, independent. And my concern has not, my comment doesn't have to do with the framework or the ecosystem. It has to do with the process.
Okay.
And so I wonder if you go to number 7, slide 7, which is the next one. And my concern with slide 7, after looking at this and thinking about it for about the last 30 minutes, is that it kind of violates organizational effectiveness principles and roles and responsibilities. You know, we have 3 groups pictured there. We have committees, we have plenary, we have management council or the board. And each of these should have certain roles and responsibilities, and I think that this is mixing them up. And that's the first thing. The second comment is that when I know that, Kim, you said that you had 4 committees on guiding principles because you didn't want to offend anyone. But I believe that from an organizational effectiveness principles, they say that if you give responsibilities to more than one person, you don't get anything done. No one takes responsibility. Okay. So those are my comments there, and like I said, I'll take it offline, and maybe we can think about that a little bit.
No, so I'll respond to the second one first, and I think Peter wanted to respond to your first one. The second one, again, is, remember, my goal was not to piss anybody off in the room. It was my turn. And so I put the ones that we knew that had active roles in each of these at this point, but there does need to be one lead at some point. And as we clearly define those objectives, we'll figure out, it makes more sense for the user experience committee to really be the lead on this one. So we do not want to have the situation where there's a tug of war between everybody kind of going their own path. We do want to have one lead committee at some point. At this level of discussion, if we would have had one box up there for each of those, the box that was missing, people would have tuned out. I know you guys.
No, the only other complementary element I would say is these are the high-level blocks of work that need to be done. Within each of those rows, it's going to further decompose, and I mean that in the positive sense, into smaller units, each of which will require a single clear lead. And I think in that sense, you're absolutely right. It's the old joke about, 4 people, anybody, everybody, somebody, and nobody's always the one that ends up with all the work.
So thank you so much for at least starting this conversation. We will make sure that we have a way to get your feedback to us. By the end of the day tomorrow, we'll have that clearly defined, and then we can continue moving down this path. So thank you so much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, before you head out, let me just say